and we'll do it live. We'll do it live. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the subject again. If you don't like the subject, then go watch someone else's channel. But I'm going to talk about Rome and the Vatican and their war against Russia. Because I'm starting to put this picture together, and it's starting to make a lot of sense. It's starting to make a lot of sense to me. I haven't always been on this anti-Roman kick. I've been kind of off and on it for a while, but it's starting to make a lot of sense now that I'm looking back at Pope John Paul and what happened during the 1990s in the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union collapsed. It was Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul and George Soros. And that's all you need to know, man. The Republican Party of the US, Rome, and the Jewish Mafia all working together to overthrow Russia and steal Russia. And this has been going on the whole time. Now, as they're doing this, at the time, I guess it was justifiable because you could say, well, Russia's been under communism, and that's not Christianity. And so that justifies the Catholic Church to want to overthrow Russia, except it was the U.S. and the Republican Party. I'm not going to reread you the article. It's New York Times. I think it's 11 May 1917. Is that when it was? You can read it for yourself. It's called Warning to New Russia. Go read it yourself. Or you can watch my other video called Communist Bankers, The Secret History of the Republican Party, or something like that. I'm not going to read you that article again. But I'm looking at this connection between Rome and the Vatican and war with Russia, and it just keeps appearing through time. And of course, that's how this whole thing started, is the East and the West split. And I don't know that whole history because I'm not really that familiar with the history of the Catholic Church and how it split, and the Eastern Church from Constantinople went up into Russia, and then the other church went to Rome. But since that time, I believe that the Romans have suggested that they're the sole, the one and only church, and that anything other than that is fair game to basically be destroyed. And that's kind of what's been happening, not just to Russia, but to America and Europe, if you haven't noticed. If you haven't noticed. I'm not going to go through the whole history of how the Jesuits were used to overthrow the kings of Europe and bring in a republican system again. I'm not going to go over that because you've already heard that too many times. I'm not going to tell you how Karl Marx went to a Jesuit school. He was Jewish, and he went to a Jesuit school. And then he and a bunch of the guys from the Jesuit school incited a revolt with the media to overthrow the King of England, which failed. I'm not going to go through that history again. And how they wanted to set up a central bank. Progressive income tax. We have all that stuff in the West. Let's look at, so now here's what I was telling you before. If you've known any Russians, and I've known a few, they were actually most of the people I knew were actually Ukrainians. And I don't know if they were Ukrainian or Russian or what. I don't even think they really thought about it back then. But so one lady I knew, she lived under communism, and then she left when she was a teenager. And then she came to, she actually came up through the border into California. And so she was, I think she was about 20 years old when I met her. And she used to tell me about, because I was like, Ronald Reagan, we're the Americans. And she was telling me, she just thought that was so silly. And she just thought it was so silly how America used to call them the evil empire. And they would just laugh at that because it was so stupid and ridiculous, such a stupid, ridiculous meme. Oh, the evil empire. And then you see these Russian people, they're so nice, right? They're so nice, and the women are very beautiful, and then they're like high cultured. And you look at, like, if you ever watched the Olympics back in like 70s and 80s and into the 90s, the Russians were so amazing in the Olympics, particularly in gymnastics and stuff. Like everything about their culture is like really good. And they had some rough times and stuff. But the thing you have to understand about Russians, from my perspective, with the little I know about Russians, is that Russians act like Russians, and they have a certain way of life, and they have a certain type of culture. And if the government changes and stuff, it really doesn't affect the Russian people that much. They just go on being Russians. So, like, you could say, now we're all, so first they were all under the Tsar, right? And they were all Russians, and they were just living their lives as Russians, just going about their lives being Russians. And then the US backed the Jewish mafia to overthrow Russia. And that's all covered in that New York Times article from 1917 called "A Warning to New Russia," or "Warning to New Russia," I believe it's called. So you can read it there. So the Jewish mafia overthrows Russia with Trotsky and this communist revolt. And so now Trotsky's in charge of the government, and everyone's like, oh, okay, we have a new government now. And there was the fighting continued. I mean, the what was called the White Russians didn't just give up easily. They were still allied with the aristocracy and with the Russian Orthodox Church. That's who was fighting back against America at the time and against the Jewish mafia. It was the Russian Orthodox Church, and it was the militias that were loyal to the Russian Orthodox Church, and they were starting to win. Actually, they were starting to win, and so as the counter-revolution to the Trotsky U.S. Red Army, the counter-revolution was called the White Army, and they were the Christians, and they were the Christian Orthodox Church, the historical people of Russia. When they started to win, then the U.S. started sending more aid to the communists to ensure that they didn't lose, and to back them up and shore up their reserves of cash. And the excuse that they gave for doing that was that if they didn't do that, here, let me read you the article. Let me read you the article on, let's see, what's this under? Let's try Russia. So yeah, so it was called the counter-revolution. That's the white Russians, right? They were the Christian Eastern Orthodox. What's the article say here? Amazingly, see, the amazing thing about all the stuff that I know about history is it's all records that were written in articles. It's not just stuff I make up. It's not just stuff I make up like other people. Oh, I think it's this one. USAID, Russia. Yeah, I think it's this one. Okay, so here, this is an article from 1921. It says, massacre threatens all Jews as Soviet power wanes, means decreases. Waxing and waning. Waxing is when something is increasing. Waning is when something decreases. It says, massacre threatens all Jews as Soviet power wanes, declares Krenin, coming here for aid. I guess it's coming to the West, Berlin, and this is Berlin. It could be coming to the U.S. Let's read the article. Copyright 1921 by the Chicago Tribune Company, Berlin, July 19th. Russia's 6 million Jews are facing extermination by massacre as the famine is spreading. The counter-revolutionary movement is gaining, and the Soviets' control is waning. This is in 1921. So the Russian revolt of Trotsky, see, it's identifying it as Jewish. and that they're losing now. They overthrew the Tsar, and they're in power, and they were going around bossing everybody around, and then all of a sudden, the Russians just were like, no. So it says here, the counter-revolutionary movement is gaining. That's the White Army, the White Russians. And the Soviet control is waning. That would be the Soviet at that time would be the Red Army of the Jewish Trotsky setup thing. This statement is borne out by the official documents presented to the Berlin government, which show that numerous pogroms are raging in all parts of Russia and the Ukraine. The information was gathered by Dr. Joseph Krenin, a noted Jewish social worker and president of the Russian Joint Board of Jewish Societies. He says that several villages have been burned already and scores killed. Okay, so that's the article's clipped right there. I can't read anymore. But so this shows you that that they're begging America to save Russia by sending aid to the communists, or Jews will be harmed. That's what the article says. I think there's another one. No, I think that was it. I think that's the main one. I think that's the one I was interested in. So yeah. So anyway, you get the picture, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the Jewish mafia at this point is being used to overthrow Russia and bring in a new government called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. No more kings, republics. That's the whole New World Order of the Jesuits. And it's real easy to say, well, the Jews had a beef with the Tsar, and so naturally they want to overthrow the Tsar, and so it's Jewish, and it's just Jewish. It's just the Jews, and of course the Freemasons are working with them. But the other thing you have to take into consideration is, what's the Pope think about all this? Because the Pope doesn't like the Eastern Orthodox Church because it's outside of his control. And none of these revolts started in the East. They all started in the West. They started in the American colonies, and it went from the American colonies to France and Germany and into Northwestern Europe, and then into the East and into, I think, even into Turkey. I think they had a revolution there, the Young Turks. That was part of it. And the overthrow of the Tsar in Russia. So it came from the West and it swept through Europe into the East and brought in this new order. And that's called regicide, the killing of the kings. And I already explained to you why the Catholic Church wanted to get rid of the kings, because they were no longer dependable. But the Jesuits were dependable. And the Jesuits formed these coalitions with different groups. That's the whole thing. Forming coalitions with diverse groups. And diversity was their strength. See? Because then it's not just them, it's this other people doing it, and it's this other people doing it, and these people are doing it, and then everybody's doing it. So why are you so mad? It's everybody's doing it. See? But the Jews definitely have a prominent role, and so they get identified pretty easily. And the other thing about it is some of these plans are so sinister with regard to kindred Christian populations that you're not going to get Christians to do it anyway. Christians don't want to go into Russia and start exterminating Russian people and priests and burning the churches down and smashing up all the crosses and all that stuff. The people that want to do that are Muslims. The people that want to do that are some of these radical Jewish extremists, communists. So that's the other. It kind of makes me wonder about the Muslims too, because at some point, all of the churches in the East and the Middle East were all wiped out by the Muslims, um, and then and they never got them back. They never got them back, and only in Europe did they push back. But it's like the white race, Western civilization has had all the power and all the money and all the weapons for hundreds of years now, but we couldn't take back Muslim territories, even though we had nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Why not? And by I mean Muslim territories, I mean territories that were originally Greek and European that the Muslims invaded and took over, like Turkey and Syria, and that would include Palestine. And I'm not saying that we should do that, but I'm just saying, was there some kind of a deal made that they get all that? And who made that deal? I don't know. But let's go back to the Russians. The thing you got to understand about Russians is Russians are Russians, and they just keep going on being Russians. And so they could have this government, and they're still the Russians. And then now it's called this other thing, and they're still the Russians. And so when you get some idiot like Pope John Paul that goes around calling these people the evil empire, well, these are just the Russians, man. This is how they do things, okay? Just chill out, bro. Just chill out, bro. It's none of your business, actually. Why are you even talking about them? Right? And then who do they get? They get George Soros to go over there and buy off the politicians to start a civil war and get people killed in Russia in the 1990s and overthrow the country, overthrow the government in Russia, and then bring in the Jewish mafia to just take over everything. This is when Putin rose to power. So, and I'm the thing you have to understand about Putin is he was KGB, and I've been listening to some of the things that he was talking about at the time, or I have over time, some of the documentaries, and he was talking about how, because in the communist Soviet party that they were under at the time, they had a conservative right. It was like there was a right wing, which is like the hard right nationalistic Russians. That was the right wing of the Communist Party, and then there was the left wing, and they were like the reformers. That was like more the center left. It's exactly like anything you have in Europe and America. It's no different, other than there's one party instead of two. There's one party and it has different factions. There's a hard right nationalistic faction, and then there's like a centrist kind of a faction, I guess. Liberal, you want to call it liberal? The liberals, the reformers. That was so the reformers were the guy. What was the guy with the thing on his head? What was that guy? He had that birthmark on his head. What was his name? Let's look it up. Before Putin, wasn't Yeltsin. It was Gorbachev, right? Gorbachev was like a reformer, a liberal. So Gorbachev was the liberal, right? And he's working with America to bring in reforms that are going to change the government into a capitalist model. And so what happened was most people in the Soviet government at the time during the 90s kind of were under the idea that, yeah, we need some reforms. We need to make some changes to our economy and modernize our economy. They all kind of were leaning in that direction, or there were a lot of people that were, not everybody. But the liberals were, and the liberals were working with the USA, and the liberals are working with George Soros, and the liberals are working with the CIA to bring in this new thing. And so now the CIA and George Soros and the US are like totally backing Yeltsin, and they're like, but so he basically tried to dissolve the government and just take over everything and just force everything on everybody through violence. And so now it started this little war where you had like militias, and they were like arming up with AKs, and you had Yeltsin, and he's got the army because he's in the executive branch, and he's using it to send missiles, tank-fired missiles at the government building, and they're all holed up in there. It was a mess. And he's meeting with George Soros. And so, so who are the people on the world stage at the time? Well, at that time, I believe it was Clinton, and it was George Soros, and the Pope, and before that it was Reagan, I think, right? Bush, Reagan, Clinton, Pope John Paul. What does Pope John Paul say about the Russians? And why do all the conservatives think it's great? You want to have a war? Why are you so concerned about how the Russians are running their government? I mean, I don't want to use bad words, but I want to. I don't want to, but I want to. I just don't want to always use bad words, and I'm not going to. So like Pope John Paul, and then let's see, Pope John Paul and Russia. What does he say? Oh yeah, the spiritual force behind the fall. Okay, this is such baloney. Just listen to this. See, I mean, if you don't know anything about what happened during the 90s to Russia and how it came down, then so what was I saying about? Let me give you an example. Okay, so here's the part you have to know. So the U.S. backs a revolt in Russia to overthrow Russia, and then they installed the Jewish mafia with Trotsky and all these mafia figures, right? And then that kind of fails in the 1920s, and then you get this counter revolt by the White Russians. But then the U.S. is able to send in more money, right, and kind of stabilize things, then buy off Stalin or whatever. But so they kind of lost control of it. So they caused it, but then they lost control of it. And then the Russians just went on being Russians, and they're like, okay, we're called the Soviets now, and this is our. They just developed an ideology, and it's just like, okay, this is what we're doing. The thing is, you're taking it too seriously over here in America. You're like, we have to stamp out this ideology. Shut up. Just shut up in your ideology. Shut the hell up. Okay? Let's this is what I'm talking about. If you don't know anything about Russians or how all this happened, and you listen to Pope John Paul, what is he going to say about Russia? It's going to be some baloney. Let's see if I can find a clip of him speaking. Oh, China and Russia. How would Paul confront it? Gorbachev and John Paul had a great appreciation for each other. Of course, because Gorbachev was selling out Russia to the West. Because was Gorbachev a Christian? Probably not. So he didn't really care about Russia's Christian Eastern Orthodox history. Gorbachev religion. Gorbachev religion. He had Marxist-Leninist ideals, and he was a reformer, meaning he was a liberal. And he was made a bunch of deals with Reagan, and anyway, yeah. What is the main religion of the Soviet Union? Orthodox Christianity. It was demographically, politically, and culturally by far the most important religion of the Russian Empire, and remained as such during the Soviet period and beyond. Right, it never really went away. But let's see if I can find some clips of John Paul. John Paul would rebuke J.D. Vance. Okay, what is this? This is what I'm talking about. Oh, I can't even access Facebook. Never mind. I can't even go there. We'll look on YouTube. John Paul, Soviet Union. What is this?
Pope John Paul II and Mikhail Gorbachev developed a personal relationship that helped improve.
Let me turn up my volume.
Pope John Paul II and Mikhail Gorbachev developed a personal relationship that helped improve relations between the Vatican and the Soviet Union and lead to the eventual opening of the Soviet regime. In 2014, the current Russian ambassador to the Holy See shared this about the meeting between the Pope and the Russian president, which took place on December 1st, 1989.
Le président Gorbatchev a été ravi.
President Gorbachev was delighted after meeting John Paul II. In fact, he spoke very highly of him.
Okay, well, that's very nice. But here we go. Here's another one. Goya Producciones. Liberating a Continent. John Paul II and the Fall of Communism. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. Listen. It's when you say the Russians in the 1990s were quote unquote communists, all that really means is that America can't sell shit there, that it's blocked, it's a closed society. What was the whole George Soros thing called? The Open Society Foundation. Open up and let me in. See, that's what that is. It's like one time when I was I drove a taxi cab one time on the weekends. I thought it was fun, and I earned a little extra money. And I picked up a bunch of people, and a lot of people got out of the cab, and they were getting out. And I was left in the cab I had two people left in my cab, an African American lady, and an Indian man, and they were in the back of the cab. And I'm driving. They weren't together, and we're driving around, and all of a sudden he starts attacking her in the back of the car, and she's taking off her shoe and she's holding it in her hand. She's gonna beat him with it, right? She's like, "You better watch out." And I'm sitting there thinking, "What in the world is going on?" Right? And so I basically told the guy, I go, "Hey man, you just need to chill out back there." And he did, and I took her home, and I was very proud of myself for doing that, for standing up for this poor lady who was basically alone with two guys. And so she was safe, you know what I mean? Because I was there to help her. Anyway, that's what it reminds me of. That's what all this stuff about, Pope John Paul and calling the Russians the evil empire, and they need to be liberated. Okay, you're not liberating anyone, bro. You're not liberating anyone. Sorry, we need to liberate ourselves over here. But what is this? Here's this trailer. Yeah.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Churches were closed. Part of the clergy were exiled to Siberia.
So the problem with this is definitely this is like a major propaganda thing, right? Yes, the churches were closed by the U.S.-backed communists. And then once that settled down, there was things stabilized. And it, just like I read you here, it says, what was the religion and what was the main religion of the Soviet Union? It says, here's the answer. It says Orthodox Christianity was demographically, politically, and culturally by far the most important religion of the Russian Empire and remained as such during the Soviet period and beyond. So it's like the way they frame what happened in Russia with the Soviet Union is very misleading, because those kind of things did happen, right? They did attack the churches. Who attacked the churches? Certain people attacked the churches. But what I'm saying is that this kind of a documentary, which is obviously, I mean, it's all Catholics. Like the people they're interviewing, the people that are talking, these are Roman Catholics. They're being misleading. Here, okay, so here's, what is this? Here's Pope John Paul visits Poland. 40 years ago, John Paul II's first visit to Poland that brought the collapse of communism. Okay. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is I foresee that we're going to have this whole thing. You're going to have Republican radio, and they've already started this. We need a pope. We need a pope like John Paul, who's going to dig his heels in for conservatism, and we need to do this. We need to do that. It's like, dude, we don't need to do anything. We're the Americans. You can just go do your thing somewhere else, bro. Just do your thing somewhere else, and we'll do our thing. Okay? Can you just do your own thing? Because this is America. We're not an arm of the Catholic Church, and we don't need a war with Russia. Russia is doing just fine without us. But here's Trump too. Like, I love Trump. Don't get me wrong. But so, here's
Over
Trump.
the years, the United States has been very good to a lot of people.
This is Trump. It says Russia has made a pretty big I don't know. Let's just hear what he said.
And it's time for us to benefit also. And we want to end that war. We want to end.
Now, notice this is the key talking point coming out of the Trump administration, which I like Trump. I do. I voted for him 3 times, but I'm not an idiot. Okay, I can kind of see what they're doing, and they keep using this term "end the war," because everybody wants the war to end. Like the people that voted for him, they want the war to end. Like, hey, end the war, okay? So now what they do, and what Trump's doing, and Marco Rubio's doing, and J.D. Vance is doing, and what's the other guy? The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. They're all using this phrase over and over and saying, we need to end the war. We want to end the war. Come on, let's end the war. And by end the war, they mean they want to negotiate something with Russia and saying, if you don't stop attacking the Ukrainian line, then we're going to do this, which isn't going to end the war. Because they don't just want to end the war. They want to get something. They want to get something out of Ukraine. And this has been a mistake since the beginning. It's been a mistake since 1917 when they started this. It was a mistake. It's always been a mistake. It's the stupidest thing that America could be doing. And so that's why I'm just looking at, well, whose interest is it? Obviously, the U.S. obviously has some interest in it because they're doing it, but they're not the only one. The U.S. and London, and you could look. I mean, the Jewish mafia is an obvious one, but I definitely think that there's Rome. Well, there is. I mean, Pope Francis met with Zelensky, and Pope Francis held up. See, when Pope Francis holds up the Ukrainian flag and says, "I just want peace. I just want peace. We need peace. Oh, stop the violence." And he's holding the Ukrainian flag and he's meeting with the Ukrainians and he's meeting with Zelensky. That's baloney, okay? That's a nice word for it, baloney. It's baloney. He wants Ukraine is what he wants. He wants Ukraine. He wants to bring down Russia, just like they tried to do with George Soros in the picture that I posted as a meme or as a image on this video. Right? It was George Soros and Pope John Paul and the U.S. government. Right? It's a coordinated effort. And what I'm saying is, the excuses that they give for doing all this stuff is like, well, the Russian government's bad because it doesn't do what we do. They don't promote LGBT kids. That's terrible. It's not terrible. That's not terrible. LGBT kids, teaching kids to be LGBT is terrible. And the Russians won't let Americans adopt kids from Russia because of that, because they want to protect their children from weirdos. So that's not terrible. What I'm saying is, we need to leave the Russians alone and stop it trying to mess with them and mess with their society, and form some kind of an alliance of decent human beings that want to get along with each other, Americans and Europeans and Russians, and we all work together. And what I think we should do is work on space-based stuff where we not only space stuff on Earth too, environmental improvements. I mean, anybody can make we can always make, at this point with where technology is advanced, everybody should have a house. Everybody should have transportation. I mean, those things should be easy to make. So that could be done in the first couple weeks if I was in charge. Like, you just produce enough stuff for everybody. It's like a piece of cake. Get everybody to work producing things of value. It's not that hard. Beyond that, what are you going to do? You can have work on the environment. You can work on space projects and building things out into space and have like space bases. That would be the Russians and the Europeans and the Americans. That's who would do that. And that's who should do that. And that's what we should be working on. And, you know, we shouldn't be fighting with the Russians over Ukraine because that's historically theirs. And I don't need to take that from. But so let's look at some. So what's Trump saying here? They're going to use the word "end the war" over and over again, but they don't really mean that.
Quickly, and I think we've made a lot of progress, and we'll see what happens. This next few days is going to be very important. Meetings are taking place right now. I'd be happy if you did. And it was only when I got out, and you know, when you mentioned what happened, and then I look at and I see the results, it's horrible. It's a killing field. 5,000 soldiers a week on average. And we want to stop that. We both want to stop that for a lot of reasons, but I would say that is my number one reason. Yeah, please go ahead.
Mr. President, this morning in a Truth Social post, you used the word Vladimir stop. That seemed like a slightly different message.
Can you believe that? Trump's like, Vladimir, stop, on his Truth Social. Do you think the Russians care about that? No, dude. That's like if America invaded, that's like if the Russians invaded, it's like if the Russians invaded, I don't know, New England. And they're like, this is ours. Why? Because you guys are terrible and we need to liberate this part of America from you. We're taking New York and we're taking Connecticut and Rhode Island and Delaware. And everyone's like, dude, that's America. What are you doing? Get out of here. It's just the whole premise is idiotic. But what else does Trump say?
What is your level of frustration with President Putin?
I didn't like last night. I wasn't happy with it. And we're in the midst of talking peace and missiles were fired. And I was not happy with it. That's what I meant. And that's, you know, what things I will say. But that one is well on its way. We could have a very, very good decision. And I'll idea what pressure I'm putting on Russia. We're putting a lot of pressure.
Can you maybe tell us?
We're putting a lot of pressure on Russia. And Russia knows that, and some people that are close to it know, or he wouldn't be talking right now.
I don't know why that's something to be proud of. Why would you want to put pressure on Russia? They're not really doing anything to us. Or maybe they are, and I just don't know about it. But how about we just, instead of putting pressure on Russia or fighting with Russia and arming Zelensky, how about we come up with a plan for the future that includes Russia and Europe all working together? I think the only thing, is resolving the problems on the earth, I think that takes a couple of weeks, honestly. If it would just be so easy to fix the problems on the earth. And then it's like, now what do we do? Now we build out into space. You got the moon, you got Mars, you got Venus. People think that's uninhabitable, but I suspect maybe it actually is inhabitable. Habitable. I don't know. Those are some ideas. You got some of the planets going around Jupiter, which I believe are habitable because Jupiter, I think, gives off heat, kind of like a tiny sun. I think that's what it is. That's why it's a gas planet. I think it gives off heat and radiation, but I don't know because I'm not an astrophysicist. I just believe that. I could be wrong. Anyway, what else does Trump say?
The Prime Minister understands that better than anybody. He wouldn't be talking right now. He's talking. And we're putting a lot of pressure. I think he wants to make a deal. We're going to find out very soon, but it takes two to tango. And you have to have Ukraine want to make a deal too. And they're being hit very hard. And I do believe they want to make a deal. I don't know that you can ever say there's going to be a winner to this because so many lives have been lost.
First of all,
Here's Rubio.
For our partners was options to discuss about things that would take to end the war. This war is endable.
See, now notice how Rubio just used "end the war" and "this war is endable." He said, "End the war." This war is. They want to keep that word, that phrase going, so that you're on board. Okay, they're trying to end the war. But if you look at what they're actually doing, All America has to do to, quote, end the war is stop arming Ukraine. That's all you have to do. Why don't you just do that? You really want to end the war? Then just stop arming Ukraine. But they're not going to do that because they're committed to Ukraine, and so then they're not really going to end the war. And that what they want to do is they want the Russians to concede something. They want to get the Russians to concede. And so you figure the Russians have put all this effort into defending the territory where they live from a neighbor that's completely hostile and psychotic, Zelensky. This whole mafia network, and it's like that's not going to happen. It just won't. And ultimately, I don't even think the Russians care what Trump and Rubio say about any of this. I don't think they actually care. Like, I don't think that's going to change anything because I think they're totally committed, and there's nothing that Trump and Rubio are going to say to make them stop fighting for that territory. And so, why do we want it? We don't even go look at San Francisco. Look, go to San Francisco and just look around and go, this place is a giant toilet. Or go to parts of Southern California. You'll see the same thing. You can drive through parts of Los Angeles. If I get in my car and I drive from here to West Los Angeles, most of that territory, I don't even want to be there. I just want to keep driving through it. It's just stupid. It's ugly. It's dirty. It's just not very nice. And this is California. This is like heaven, remember? This is like where everybody in the world wants to be. There's parts of West LA that are nice, like right along the beach, but you'll still see some weird stuff out there. There's nice restaurants out there. You could be having a steak dinner on the beach in a fancy restaurant, having a prime rib steak dinner, and then you just look out onto the beach, and you'll see, sadly, crazy stuff going on the beach. You know what I mean? Weird stuff, and people that are like, you could describe them as feral humans. Feral humans. What am I saying should be done about feral humans? I think you should help them. I think you should help them. Look, because people are going to say, you don't like homeless people, blah, blah, blah. No, actually, I do. What I would do is I would find out what they actually need. Like, what does this person need right now on an immediate basis? You know how they have those space blankets, and they give them out to the immigrants. You'll see the immigrants have these blankets. They're like they look metallic almost. They're like these shiny material, and like, oh, the migrants need the blankets. We got to get them these blankets that they can survive in extreme temperatures. They're like space. They're like from the astronaut technology blankets, right? So the migrants are getting those, and the migrants are getting this, and I would say, hey, here's a bunch of homeless people. We can't like buy them all houses, but hey, can we get them space blankets? Can we get them, some like camping gear to sleep on, just so that they're at least comfortable? Maybe set up an area outside of town, maybe in an industrial area away from people's homes, where there's like showers and bathrooms and places to rest. That's a real simple thing to do. You got cities in Los Angeles, like, you have residential areas, and then you've got industrial parks where business is happening, and there's trucks driving around, and there's industry, and nobody lives there. Nobody wants to live there. It's an industrial park. Well, why not set up stuff out there where they all, instead of being right in front of your $1 million house view, or like you're eating a prime rib and drinking a glass of wine with your girlfriend, and then there's like a guy doing something bad on the beach. Why not set up something in an industrial area, and they all get attracted to there, and they get food? I mean, how expensive is? Can you just give them some food, just a piece of food? Just give them a little food, something nutritious to eat, some water with electrolytes. Have vitamins available. Have some camping kind of gear where they can sleep, that has like some kind of a pad they can lay on, some blankets, and brush their teeth and take a shower and get cleaned up and get a haircut. Okay. And then make it so you can't get drugs in or out of there, because you don't want it to become a drug haven. But that's something you could do that would improve the situation. So you talk about, we need to take Ukraine and turn it into what? San Francisco? Turn it into some other American shithole toilet culture city? No thanks. No thank you. No thank you. We already have that. We already have enough of that. We don't need more of that. So unless you have some better idea, no thank you. And I don't know that Trump has a better idea. Maybe his ideas are better, but Trump's only going to be around for a little while. And then what? We're going to go right back to Kamala Harris or some other idiot like Gavin Newsom. It's just, there's no long-term thing to strive for. And that's another reason why we are in danger of losing to the Russians or the Chinese, because the Chinese are looking at their future as being, 1,000 years out. You think how can you plan a future 1,000 years out when your next president could be Michelle Obama? That's possible, right? Oh my God. Well, that just ends all your plans right there. Why are you planning with this equation involved in? Why would you plan something with these people? Doesn't work. Anyway, what else does he say?
Both sides just have to agree to it. We've shown them a pathway forward. We've discussed those ideas. It was a good meeting yesterday. There'll be good meetings over the weekend. We've shown them the finish line. We need both of them to say yes. But what happened last night with those missile strikes should remind everybody of why this war needs to end.
Zelensky has said that he wants more Patriot missiles. So far, has been no response from the United States.
A lot of pressure on both. If you think we're just in there because we're nice people, and we are nice people, but we're using a lot of pressure on both.
What concession, Mr. President, is your national security?
Okay, whatever. Trump to impose more sanctions on Russia. That's lame. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to end off, but all I'm going to say is Russia is just Russians. Whatever the government is, whatever they have, they're just Russians. And whatever you want to call them, they're always just Russians. And if you've ever known any Russians, they're just like, yeah, the government was this or the government was that, and we're the Russians. And then it doesn't really matter what you call it. So when they said that the Russians were the evil empire, and then you meet the people and they're all super nice and they're like, we're not the evil empire, that's dumb. It is dumb. It's a stupid thing to say. So Ronald Reagan, who I liked, he was a good guy, but he said stupid things on behalf of these idiots. And John Paul, I guess he was from Poland or whatever. So, but here's what I'm saying: we're going to get these Republicans and these conservatives that are involved in the Republican Party, and they're going to be all rah rah rah. Let's all work for another pope. We don't need another pope. We're the Americans. We don't need another pope ever again. I don't want to hear from the Pope again, ever, as long as I live. And we don't need the Jewish mafia or any of that stuff. We need to do our own thing. And so, that's the theme of all my videos. Let's do our own thing because we're the Americans. We're not these other things. And so let's make something for ourselves in America where we live. Have a good night.